was all forest. So it was to clear the site, to lay it out, to get it prepared for selling property. So that's what Tacoma looked like at that time. This is new Tacoma. Obviously old Tacoma down in Old Town had been around for a while, was more developed. Northern Pacific was doing the thing that all of the railroads did, which was they never generally put their stations in existing towns. They created a new town because they would be able to sell the property. This is a picture from 1881. The picture is being taken from about the 800 block of Fawcett Avenue. So if you think of where the municipal building is and you go up that hill a little ways, so we're looking down, so here's the Hosmer House. This is Saint Helens along here, so it's facing Saint Helens at this time. The house is built by the Northern Pacific Railroad. And then this other building right here is the actual headquarters of Pacific Railroad, and most importantly, the Tacoma Land Company, which Hosmer is also now the general manager of. This building, that's, if you look at this very closely, you'll see that there's actually scaffolding here. This is the Pierce County Courthouse that's going up right here. This area of Tacoma in 1881 is the suburb, because it's back at the headquarters of the Theophos is where the town wharf is and where the commercial, what commercial there is, and so anyway. This is a sketch from West Coast magazine. In the 1880s and 1890s was the Sunset magazine for investors, and it has these wonderful sketches because of course photography, although it existed, was very expensive, and it's not something that you saw frequently in magazines. And so a lot of these sketches are the only things that we have from frequently very small towns in Washington, Oregon, California. So this is the Hosmer House. You can see that it had a front porch that went all the way across here. There's a little bay window here on this side. It also has this wonderful little filigree along the porch and up at the crown that's probably cast iron. That was very popular at the time, to add a little more, well, it's because they could do it. The house itself was the Tacoma Land Office building. Probably were either pattern book designs or possibly designs that the railroad had been using. And it was also probably built as a double house, and I'll talk about that in a minute. This is the land office building. It's interesting that although this building is basically the headquarters and the land office, and so it's clearly a commercial building, but it's actually built as a residential structure. It would be easy to sell this, and I think that was what they were thinking is that we're not going to be here for very long. We'll sell this as a residential property at some point down the road.
Now that building is no longer there.
That building, it was destroyed in the 1930s. It was moved. We have a lot of peripatetic buildings in Tacoma. This building, which sat across the South 9th at the corner of, actually right across from the Pantages now on Broadway, it was moved up to 701 Saint Helens in 1888. And it stayed there as a boarding house and hotel and several different instantiations until it was finally taken down. So it no longer exists. This is one of those wonderful bird's eye maps from 1885, and here I've outlined, there's the Hosmer House and there's the land office right there. Here's a picture, we're not exactly sure when this picture was taken, sometime between about 1890 to about 1900. It could be as late as 1900. Here we have the Boswick Hotel. That's why we know that it's at least 1890. And right over here, you can see just the facade of the Hosmer House.
Does it still have the iron filigree?
No. This is a Sanborn fire insurance map. This is from 1893. We also have an earlier one from 1886, but this one's more colorful, so I included it here. And we can see the house sitting here on St. Helens. This is 9th. This I'll talk about in a little bit. This is the Tacoma Theater, which burned down in '65. It's already got that extension on the back. It's hard to see it today, but it actually extends back. And probably by this time, we know it was already being used as a boarding house. The interesting detail here that you see in the fire insurance map is, you see this line right here, but down the middle? That very strongly suggests that this was a double house. In other words, it was a duplex. There was two sides, and one family on one side, one family on the other side. And there are references in the texts that we have about that the house was obviously Hosmer's house, but it was also a place where the upper level execs or whoever from the railroad would come and stay as well. And so that might have been the other half of the house for a while.
Now the house looks like it's set back further on the street than it really is.
Okay, now it moves in 1904 and turns this way. So the legal description of this house is one of the most complex I've ever seen, because it actually crosses 5 different lots at different angles. So it's just a very elaborate piece of legal text. But right now, it's in its original position. Now, this happened in 1904, but this picture is from 1925. We see the house as we see it today, now facing South 9th. Here's the Rialto. Here's the construction scaffolding on First Baptist Church being built at that time. And so it's been turned and placed in this spot. This is the Coswell building here, 1914. This building back here originally was the Rhodes Apartments, now the Rialto Apartments, was built in 1918, brick building. And this building is so close to the Hosmer House, there's only about a foot between the eaves of the Hosmer House and the Rialto Apartments.
So there's your east.
Well, we can't take pictures of that side. That's the west side.
It's got a picture.
Well, yeah. Okay, so in the house was almost torn down several times. In 1924, about that time, when Henry Rhodes was planning to build the Rhodes Medical Building, which is now the municipal building that we use, his idea was to put it at the corner of South 9th and Saint Helens, right where this was, and would take that section. He had recently built the Rhodes apartment building, so he wasn't planning on taking that down, but he thought that corner would be best. He had some Seattle investors, and they were the ones who said, if you buy up some land further up the block and you have 2 entrances, that would probably be a lot cooler for the building, and so he did. And so it wasn't torn down. In 1956, they have all of the tenants, it's been a boarding house, apartment building. All of the tenants are out of the building except for one in this newspaper article. It says down here, whose house was it? And they're a little unsure as to exactly what it is and who owned it and who lived there and so forth. Audsley Frazier, who was Henry Rhodes's son-in-law, now in charge of the Rhodes real estate business, is planning on tearing it down for a parking lot. We don't know why it doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen. But this is the article was in the newspaper, and it really is. It's really funny to read it because they really are like, we think we know what it is, but we're not really sure.
Does it call it the Hosmer House?
No, it's called the Exley. When Henry Rhodes bought it in 1914 and redid it into apartments, Heath and Gove were the architects for that work. It's probably the time when this more elaborate portico entrance was added. He named it Exley after his father's hometown in England. It's called the Exley, and it is called the Exley today, the Exley Apartments. So, in 1975, it is condemned and boarded up. So in 1980, the city, along with its current owner, Paul Merlino Arts Center, hires architect Gene Grulich. They get $300,000 in HUD money from the city to renovate it, which is largely why we see it in the condition that it is today. It had been probably in the 50s covered with an asbestos shingles. So in this picture, that has already been taken off. You can see some of the windows have lost some of the window hoods here, and so a lot of this had to be replicated. And it's taken from an 18-room boarding house with sort of shared bathrooms to 12 apartments with kitchens and bathrooms, and so more contemporary, which it is still today. So, who was Hosmer? I've already mentioned some of this. He was the secretary of the selection committee in 1873. Then, of course, as soon as they select Tacoma, he becomes the special agent and is in charge of the site. He will be in charge of the site until it is incorporated. He's the president of the Board of Trustees in 1880, and a Board of Trustees is created in order to be able to petition the state government in order to make it into a city. And he is elected the first mayor in 1882. However, Mrs. Hosmer is ill at this time, and they leave Tacoma to go back to Philadelphia because of her health. She does not do very well, and in the early part of 1885, she passes away. That same year, he's back in Tacoma with his son and doing more stuff. He was the general manager for the Tacoma Land Company. The land company held all of the land that the railroad owned in Tacoma. So if you were going to build something in Tacoma, you bought your land here. He was the president of Tacoma Light and Water Company until his death in 1900. This building no longer stands. It's the old Tacoma Gas Works. He was the president of the Wilkerson Coal and Coke Company. These are the coke kilns at Wilkerson. This was very important because it was providing coal and coke for not only ships, but also for the railroad.
Is that Wilkerson Hotel?
Yeah, and there was a line, a railroad line that ran, that they built to that so that they could get that down to Tacoma. He was one of the directors of the Pacific National Bank. Everybody should recognize this building, the Luzon building. He was vestryman and benefactor for St. Luke's. Charles B. Wright provided the money basically for building St. Luke's, but Hosmer was also involved in that and getting Wright to donate the money for it. This of course is the original location for St. Luke's. St. Luke's was deconstructed and reconstructed at its current site. He was a trustee and longtime treasurer for Annie Wright's Seminary. This is the original Annie Wright Seminary. This picture is taken from Tacoma Avenue. Think about Tacoma Avenue, right where Franco's the tailor's shop is and the Tully's. This is the site where the original Annie
Did they
Wright.
move to the school?
No, they built a new school at the new location. He was founder of the University Union Club, which is right up the street here from us. His second house that he built in 1890, also a double house, was not exactly across the street, but almost across the street from the club. He was Incorporator, which basically means one of the founders, one of the original founders of University of Puget Sound. This is the original University of Puget Sound building that was at the corner of Sprague and 6th Avenue. Later, the campus moved to its current location. He was the Tacoma Hotel, was built by the Northern Pacific Railroad. He was the one who basically engineered that, getting the railroad to do that. And he may also have been involved in getting the stadium, which of course was also a destination hotel. Don't know that for certain, but he was definitely involved with this. And then probably the thing that, I don't know, but I like to think that he was the founder and president of the Tacoma Theater Company and built this incredibly marvelous and huge theater that was at the corner, this South 9th. This is Broadway. The Pantages would be right over here. This sadly burned. This is a wonderful brick, sort of Richardsonian style building. The largest stage on the West Coast for decades. Built in 1888, I believe, and burned in 1964. He did a lot in Tacoma. He did die in Tacoma. His his wife was buried in Sandusky, and so they had a huge, as you can imagine, a huge funeral for him here, but he is buried in Sandusky, Ohio. It's kind of interesting. There's a story in the newspaper, just a very brief little thing, about some people showing up at City Council in 1987 to complain about, anybody's guess, street condition. And he was part of the delegation. The City Council made him wait 3 hours. So even if you're the founder and the first mayor, you still have to wait on the City Council.